Today we're going to be talking about deploying applications at the edge to Rockwell edge devices. So we're going to talk about the OptixEdge embedded edge compute, and then I'm also going to talk about some of our AI products that are also deployed through containerization to edge devices. So this is just an overview of what we're going to talk about today. OptixEdge is another way to deploy optics, and it is another headless option, so that means it's not connected to an actual optics panel. It's its own computer. So if you've ever seen our compact optics panel, this is essentially that same device, just the computer part of it without the screen. So it's the exact same form factor, it's the exact same features, things like that for those specs for that computer. What you can do with OptixEdge is a little bit more advanced than using a compact optics panel. So you can collect, analyze, and push data, as well as provide remote assistance, that is a remote access, which I think was also a session today. And then you can extend the embedded capabilities using Docker. And we'll get into that a little bit later as well. And where would you install OptixEdge? It's at the machine edge, so it's not necessarily installed within the process on the machine. It could be like in an office, near the plant floor, or it could be outside of that panel, just on a DIN rail somewhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the machine. And again, like I said, it's a headless device, so it doesn't have a screen. It's just a small computer, and you'll see what that looks like on the next slide. So it does have network functionality, so you can NAT, route, internet share, things like that. And we also have a Stratix 4300 remote access router, and it has the same features as that router. So here is what the OptixEdge looks like. It's the super small box that's on the far left, and this is just different images of it from different point of views. So like I said, the software is Optix. It includes remote access as well. All of our Optix devices through Awesome include remote access. So the options and specs for the OptixEdge, you can only get an extra small and a small right now, which is very similar to a compact panel. You can only get extra small or small. The HMI software is Optix, and you can use that in your web browser. You can use it on your host machine, on a VM, etc. It's not limited to like a Windows machine, for example. You can connect to third-party software, and one of the main third-party softwares that we're using with this specific module is Docker. And if you're familiar with containers, Docker is one of those applications where you can create containers and deploy them to different devices or virtual machines. So now we're talking about deployment. So for FactoryTalk Optics, you can deploy it to an OptixPanel, or you could have an actual machine that's running Windows and deploy Optix to that when you have the runtime installed on that Windows PC. You can also deploy it to a headless device, which is OptixEdge or the embedded edge compute. So you can see the overlap of the way we have OptixEdge, the Stratix 4300, we have an OptixPanel, and then the embedded edge compute, and how we actually use remote access and deploy optics to those devices. And I know there's a lot of stuff on here that's like overlapping and all the colors touch. And then without talking about the OptixPanels with the screen, all of our headless options are on this screen. So primarily the Stratix 4300 is used for remote access and wireless support, and that includes 5G, and I'm not sure who our cellular connectivity is through at this point. So deploying to the OptixEdge does not require you to really know a whole lot of details about what to do, because the wizard actually walks you through each step. So it's web-based, just like Optix. So once you connect your device and you have your IP address and all that's configured and you plugged it into your network, you type in the IP address of the device and it takes you to this web page. And you will configure your application from here. And you'll tell it what data sources you're connecting to. And as you can see, we also include our third-party connectivity, just like with our OptixPanels. It's the same things. So you configure that, you name your station. You can also connect to everything else that Optix connects to. So you have OPC UA, MQTT, data loggers, etc. And then you can build a dashboard. Let's say you don't only have this one OptixEdge, you may have more than one. You can display all of your information for all your devices in one dashboard. So like it's one centralized location to manage everything. And it's similarly that way for remote access. You have a web page for remote access, and everything you're deploying to is in that window, so you can see all your devices in one place. And then once you're finished with that, you deploy it. And now moving into container support. So like I was saying before, we also have applications that are not specific to Optix and don't run on Optix devices. You can also deploy those on a virtual machine, which is how I run mine from my laptop right here. And how you do that is you put your application in a container. Now, I had no idea what a container was 2 years ago, like no idea at all. And then Rockwell decided we were releasing products that are AI-based and the machine learning's built in, and that includes Guardian AI, Logix AI, and Vision AI. Those applications are ran on a Linux operating system as a container, so you don't have to put them on a Windows machine at all. You could run on a headless IPC, an industrial computer, and those deploy super simply. I'll actually show you the instructions on exactly how to do that at the end of the presentation. So for a virtual machine, that requires a Windows machine. You could use VMware or you could use Hyper-V. I prefer Hyper-V, it's a little bit quicker to deploy images in my personal opinion. And some of them are very large, like you may need 100 gigabytes of space to actually store your applications and then log all that data on that machine. So doing it the virtual way requires you to actually make sure you're meeting the minimum requirements for the application. But running as a container, you only run that one application in that containerized way. So running a container on a PC that does not have Windows, it could be Linux-based or Ubuntu. So what we do is you can deploy Guardian AI on that one machine, and you can also deploy Logix AI on that same thing if you've got a robust enough IPC. And there are different softwares you could use to actually deploy containers. So some of those options are Minikube, Podman, Docker, Kubernetes, and Containered. I've only personally used Kubernetes and Docker going through training for Rockwell. So I have no experience with the other ones, but I do know that they exist, and you can actually deploy your own applications. If you containerize it, you can deploy those to any of our computers that don't have Windows on them. So we have a very extensive catalog of awesome devices, and those computers you can actually go through Advisor or IAB, and you can configure the catalog number based off of how you want to spec that machine out, and you'll make sure that you pick one that does not have Windows, and then you can deploy containers to it. So the OptixEdge is compatible with Docker by default. So it's mostly focused on like everyday deployment. So you don't really have to learn a whole lot about Docker outside of maybe how to install it. It's super quick. Like if you're familiar with Rockwell software, it takes hours to install like Studio 5000. Like that's a 4-hour process. You start it, let it run, and just go do something else for the rest of the day. But for deploying containers, it's just a few minutes. Like you can spin up a Guardian AI image in a few minutes, like maybe 20 if you don't know what you're doing. But if you're very familiar with like following the scripts in the manual, it's like a 10-minute process and it's ready to go. Well, I should say Portainer is actually running in the background, and that's really what's managing everything on the OptixEdge device. So essentially Portainer is like managing all the containers that exist on this device. So we have Optix running, and you could also have everything else running in the background, like remote access is on there. So everything is running, and there's no screen or anything on this device, so you connect it to another monitor, and that's how you get to the web page and look at everything. So there's a graphical interface to actually manage everything on OptixEdge, so it's not like you have to script it and figure out how to make that work. It's super intuitive. Like there's a GUI that walks you through how to do a lot of the configurations. Like I clicked through the wizard pretty quickly, but you guys will get these slides later, and it walks you through like everything step by step. So going through the Docker container support, so again, we have Portainer and Ansible running as a software that's managing the device. And then the Docker engines that it support are Portainer and Docker. And again, Optix and remote access are included when you buy our Rockwell hardware that runs Optix. So that comes with the licensing to connect to one connected end device. So if you have an OptixEdge and you're like the person who works on the floor and you're deploying Optix to that device, you have remote access to monitor that device and how it's running. So you could have remote access to service that, like say it goes out and you're an OEM and you've deployed it to the customer already. Remote access gives you the ability to monitor that device from a different location. I will say it does matter which license you have for that. So the free one is where you can connect to like one point to point. But once you get the pro license, you can go to multiple points. And that also includes connecting to your controllers on the plant floor if they're on the same network. So you're not just connected to that one Optix device that you're connected directly to. So here's an example of the architecture. So as you can see, we have our plant floor stuff on the left. We're connecting to drives, fans, whatever you have, your controllers, and you're going from Ethernet to a device. And that could be OptixEdge, it could be an OptixPanel, it could be an awesome PC. And as you can see, it automatically comes with the remote access runtime. You can upgrade to Pro, and then you have your FactoryTalk Optics runtime. And then the Docker engine is running those containers on that device, or managing them. And earlier we were talking about FactoryTalk Data Mosaics being something you can connect to through Optix. So Optix is more than just an HMI, it's really a platform. You can do a lot of things with Optix. So what this is doing or illustrating is you can gather information like from the PLC, send that information to Optix, and then you can also send that data from Optix to Data Mosaics. So now we're going to talk about use cases for OptixEdge. So it simplifies data connectivity and collection. It improves operational efficiency, is flexible and scalable, and you can standardize your solutions. So we have always had a compute module, but it was not capable of actually being an object that could receive a containered application. So our original one was more of a C++ API supported device, and our new one is C# supported. And our compute module was an open source type OS, but for our embedded edge compute, that is closed. So when you're deciding which compute module to buy, for example, I do know that if you're running Optix, the embedded edge compute and OptixEdge primarily would run with those. If you want to do like Guardian AI, Logix AI, and all the other ones, that is exclusive to the embedded edge compute. Like you can't run any of those other containers on the OptixEdge because that is an Optix device. When our embedded edge compute release 1 came out, we didn't necessarily have container support for that at that time, so Optix was not deployable to that, but it was a more powered edge compute compared to our original compute module. So then in the next release, we were able to actually run Optix on the embedded edge compute. And the package for that was extra small when it first released, and then as we released more iterations, you could upgrade that to small, medium, and large. So for the first release, here's an example of the architecture for those use cases. You'll have your embedded edge compute and the chassis connected directly to a web panel. It could be an OptixPanel, it could be just a regular monitor at the station. You could also connect from embedded edge compute and send data back and forth to OPC UA as a client, to the client or server. And then you can also send data to MQTT, which are all the same features of using Optix. Now, this is actually a very convoluted image, but at the initial release, once we had our upgrades and added Optix functionality, this is what you were capable of doing just from that initial release, which is a lot more powerful than just having a regular compute module. So now we're going on to release 2, where we actually added container support. So we added the container support to meet a wide range of customer needs. So we had greenfield and brownfield applications. Greenfield, new; brownfield, not so new, but we have room for growth. It's OEM focused, so small to large machines, simple to complex, and not just simple like using it with the first release. And it could also be end user focused, so it's not just geared towards OEMs. And again, because this is a pretty small device, there's not a lot of computing power on a device that fits in our ControlLogix chassis. So that application size comes by default as an extra small for an Optix application. And you can upgrade that license from small to large, but you can't do our unlimited package size because it can't handle all that information. So again, we're going back to Docker. As you can see, we deploy Optix through Docker. So on the embedded edge compute, we're using Docker again to deploy our Optix application to that device in the chassis. And you could also put your own custom app through Docker on that device for computing purposes, as long as it's not like overpowering the actual device. And then you can take information from that app, push that to Optix, and then read back and forth to the PLC. And this also supports using Pertainer Ansible to manage the containers that are going on the device, just like the OptixEdge. And it's the same exact situation. You deploy to the device, and you can read data back and forth. But for this specific one, we're talking to the PLC. And again, I talked about third-party applications being able to be deployed on this device. So you can run our applications, you can run our partner applications. You can build your own custom ones, or you could find third-party ones as well. And again, this OS is closed. It's not open like the original compute module. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the other applications. And I didn't include Logix AI because it's essentially the exact same process. So for Guardian AI, what you do is you deploy your container, which again, like you can use Docker, Ansible, or whatever application you're familiar with to deploy that application. And then once you know the IP address of your device, you open a web page, go to that IP address, and then you walk through the configurations of setting up Guardian AI. So the purpose of Guardian AI is to monitor the faults of pumps, fans, blowers, and motors. So those are the assets that we're able to monitor. We're only capable of connecting to our 6000T 755 class drives, including the high HP. So that's what that's limited to, so no 525 support, etc. So Guardian AI software is available on PCDC. You go to PCDC, you download it, you unzip that file, and you install an application called WinSCP on your computer. You use WinSCP to move your downloaded information over to your container. So I run my images on Hyper-V. So what I do is make sure my Hyper-V image is powered up and I have the IP address of my Guardian AI image. And you connect through WinCP. You can use the host name of the computer if you know it, or just the IP address and whichever user you configured as the login. So you log in as that user in WinSCP. Actually, before you even do that, when you're on the actual Linux machine, that user has to be a super user and you turn on SSH. We're not really gonna get into all of that. So once that's enabled, then you can connect to it through WinSCP and then you move your content over. It's literally a drag and drop from one folder to the next. You create a folder on your image where you know you're gonna put your install files, and then you connect to that location and move it over. And then from there, you're running scripts that are in the installation manual. So once you execute those, it installs Guardian AI as a container because we've already essentially built the container for you. You're just running the scripts to make sure it installs. And if it installs correctly, you go to the web page, type in the IP address, and then you're like, welcome to Guardian AI, please log in. And it's the same user that you configure through the installation steps.